Under a pale gray morning sky, the coastal mountain roads overlooking Bandar Abbas were choked with shattered concrete and the burning remains of 22 mobile missile launchers. Thick pillars of black smoke vomited from fractured subterranean command bunkers, bleeding heavy soot across the strategic maritime corridor. Several massive, heavy transport frames had been completely incinerated, their hydraulic arms twisted into blackened steel skeletons, while secondary explosions from unspent solid rocket fuel ripped through the coastal highway. The coastal defense network guarding the approaches to the Strait of Hormuz had been systematically erased from the map. It was a staggering display of deep penetration, precision firepower that left the mountain passes littered with dead systems and burning fuel slicks. But this smoking graveyard of anti-ship batteries did not materialize out of nowhere. To understand how the heavily fortified southern coast was cracked wide open in a matter of minutes, the destruction has to be traced back to the first anomaly on the early warning screens. 2:45 in the morning on the 21st of June, 2026, at 25 degrees 43 minutes north and 56 degrees 17 minutes east, the heavy summer heat trapped a thick layer of humidity over the dark waters of the Arabian Sea, right at the threshold of the narrow strait. Deep inside the coastal mountains, an Iranian strategic early warning center sat in quiet, air-conditioned isolation. Radar operators stared at the wide green sweeps of their long-range active phased array displays, monitoring the steady flow of commercial tanker traffic. Suddenly, the pristine maritime picture fractured. Faint, intermittent ghost tracks flickered at the edge of the maximum detection envelope, breaking through the coastal clutter. These were not heavy commercial freighters navigating the designated shipping lanes. The radar signatures were dispersed, incredibly fast-moving, and deliberately masking their true numbers behind walls of heavy electronic noise. Within seconds, the tracking computers filtered through the interference and isolated the massive, undeniable electromagnetic displacement of a United States Navy carrier strike group. The enormous warship was holding station just outside the immediate anti-ship kill zone, turning its massive angled flight deck straight into the wind. But the carrier was not just loitering in the open ocean. The anomalous radar clutter blooming on the Iranian screens was rapidly multiplying and descending toward the deck level. The algorithms flashed red as they identified the distinct energy signatures of A-18 Super Hornets and F-35C stealth fighters. Heavy strike packages were already airborne, burning aviation fuel in the dark as they formed up into aggressive attack vectors. The American air wing was not flying a standard patrol route. They were pushing a direct trajectory right at the Bandar Abbas approach sector. The quiet mountain bunker erupted into immediate, violent motion. Combat sirens wailed through the damp concrete corridors, their piercing tones echoing down the subterranean tunnels. Watch commanders shouted targeting coordinates across the operations floor as heavy steel blast doors automatically slammed shut and locked into place. The entire coastal defense network, containing dozens of mobile anti-ship missile units hidden deep within the rugged coastal terrain, was instantly ordered onto maximum alert. Out in the suffocating heat of the mountain passes, drivers threw themselves into the cabs of their massive transport trucks. Diesel engines roared to life, violently spitting black exhaust into the night air as the heavy units abandoned their camouflaged hides and surged onto the winding coastal highways. The shoreline was waking up to fight. The silent standoff was over, and the largest concentration of defensive firepower in the region was driving straight toward a head-on collision with the American air wing. As the Iranian shoreline woke up to fight, the American carrier strike group was already shifting from a quiet patrol formation into a full offensive posture. Aboard the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the flight deck was a chaotic, organized violence. The suffocating summer heat mixed with the overwhelming smell of raw aviation fuel and hot exhaust as jet engines screamed at maximum power. Deck crews, wearing heavy helmets and colored vests, rushed beneath the roaring intakes of F-18 Super Hornets and F-35C stealth fighters. Weapons elevators groaned as they pushed thousands of pounds of high explosives up from the deep magazines. Aviation ordnance men slammed heavy GBU-31 bunker-busting munitions onto the wing pylons of the strike fighters, locking the massive precision bombs into place. Steam hissed from the catapult tracks, rolling thick white clouds across the dark deck as the first wave of aircraft was thrown violently into the night sky. Below the flight deck, inside the dim, blue-lit combat direction centers of the escorting Aegis cruisers, operators stared intently at their tactical screens. The entire fleet was locking its defense grid together. Aboard the guided missile destroyers positioned ahead of the carrier, the steel hatches of the Mark 41 vertical launch systems slammed open. Rows of interceptor missiles sat armed and ready in their individual cells, connected directly to the ANSPY-1 phased array radars that were actively sweeping the distant coastline. The American ships were not waiting to be fired upon. They were moving deliberately into the lethal range of the coastal defense network to provide a shield for the incoming strike fighters. 80 nautical miles away, the Iranian military machine was answering the challenge. High in the jagged mountains overlooking Bandar Abbas, convoys of heavy, 10-wheeled transport trucks tore through the narrow dirt roads. Diesel engines roared and ground their gears as drivers pushed the massive mobile missile launchers to the absolute edge of their mechanical limits. These were not static, easy targets. These were highly mobile, heavily armed anti-ship batteries, designed to shoot and disappear. The trucks skidded to a halt in pre-surveyed firing positions, hidden behind rocky outcroppings and deep ravines. Immediately, support crews threw themselves out of the cabs, pulling camouflage netting away from the heavy weapon systems. The loud whine of hydraulic pumps echoed through the mountain passes as massive mechanical arms pushed the heavy missile canisters upward. The rectangular launch tubes pointed toward the black sky, angling directly toward the predicted coordinates of the American fleet. Short-range air defense units, equipped with rapid-fire cannons and point defense missiles, deployed in a tight circle around the heavy launchers, their operators aggressively scanning the dark horizon for incoming aircraft. Simultaneously, mobile radar units raised their spinning antennas into the humid air, connecting their feeds to the heavily fortified subterranean command bunkers buried deep within the mountains. Inside those thick concrete walls, regional commanders watched the hostile contacts multiplying on their screens. The American strike wave was pushing closer, and the coastal defense network was now fully deployed and waiting. Both sides had committed their forces to the battlefield. The sea and the sky were filled with the deafening roar of jet engines, the heavy rumble of warship turbines, and the high-pitched whine of targeting radars hunting in the dark. Tens of thousands of tons of steel and high explosives were now on a direct collision course, completely transforming the silent maritime corridor into a massive tactical kill zone. The distance between the inbound strike fighters and the mountain launch sites was collapsing by the second, rapidly pulling both forces into a massive, invisible collision of electronic warfare. High in the dark airspace ahead of the main American attack wave, a specialized squadron of A-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft pushed their throttles forward. These jets were not carrying heavy explosives. Their wing pylons were loaded with high-powered jamming pods designed to blind and crush the coastal defense network before the physical shooting began. As they crossed the outer threshold of the Iranian engagement zone, the electronic warfare officers in the rear cockpits activated their primary transmitters. Millions of watts of raw electromagnetic energy slammed into the Iranian early warning grid. Deep inside the subterranean command bunkers hidden under the coastal mountains, the wide green tactical displays suddenly fractured. Solid radar tracks dissolved into violently flickering static. Operators shouted over the deafening combat sirens as their screens flooded with hundreds of false target signatures, ghost formations, and blinding white noise. The American jamming wave was designed to overload the targeting processors, making it impossible for the mountain batteries to distinguish the real carrier strike group from the digital phantoms dancing across their monitors. But the Iranian Coastal Defense Force had prepared for this exact scenario. Recognizing the severity of the electronic assault, regional watch commanders instantly ordered the defense network to switch to backup frequencies. They cut the primary long-range active radar feeds and shifted their tracking to passive sensor arrays and localized optical data links. Out on the dirt roads and rocky ridges, mobile radar trucks rotated their antennas rapidly, jumping between heavily encrypted bandwidths to pierce the American interference. They did not need a perfect picture of the incoming stealth fighters. They only needed a momentary lock on the massive, unavoidable electromagnetic displacement of the American guided missile cruisers and the towering superstructure of the aircraft carrier waiting out in the dark water. Inside the sweltering cabs of the mobile missile trucks, the heavy air conditioning units fought a losing battle against the summer heat and the intense thermal output of the firing computers. Gunners gripped their consoles, sweating through their uniforms as they watched the targeting data filter down from the command bunkers. The heavy umbilical cables connecting the trucks to the elevated launch canisters pulsed with final telemetry. Digital target boxes flickered through the electronic snow, stabilized, and snapped into a solid red lock. The firing coordinates for the American warships were successfully downloaded into the guidance systems of the heavy anti-ship cruise missiles. At the exact same moment, high above the chaotic radar soup, the American strike wave was finalizing its own firing solutions. The advanced F-35C stealth fighters slipped silently through the electronic crossfire, using their passive sensors to pinpoint the exact source of the Iranian radar emissions. They mapped the locations of the mobile missile units scattered along the highways and isolated the deep concrete command bunkers hidden beneath the mountain rock. Through secure, encrypted data links, the stealth fighters instantly shared these precise coordinates with the heavy F-A-18 Super Hornets trailing directly behind them. In the cockpits of the Super Hornets, pilots stared at their digital head-up displays as the green target brackets clamped firmly over the subterranean bunkers. The massive GBU-31 bunker-busting munitions under their wings received the final satellite coordinates. The invisible war of frequencies and ghost signals had reached its absolute limit. Both sides had found their marks through the blinding static, and thousands of men now held their breath as the electronic standoff moved irreversibly toward the first physical launch. The invisible war of frequencies had reached its absolute breaking point, and the digital standoff was instantly replaced by the deafening roar of raw firepower. Aboard the American guided missile cruisers holding station in the dark waters of the Arabian Sea, tactical action officers authorized the final strike packages. The command to open fire echoed through the blue-lit combat direction centers. On the forward decks, the heavy steel hatches of the Mark 41 vertical launch systems violently blew open. Solid rocket boosters ignited with a catastrophic roar, sending blinding columns of yellow fire hundreds of feet into the black sky. The massive warships shuddered under the immense physical pressure as dozens of Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles punched through the heavy, humid air. The missiles climbed rapidly, arcing over the fleet before shedding their spent boosters and deploying their stub wings. Small turbine engines spooled up with a high-pitched whine as the heavy weapons dropped down to just meters above the wave tops, forming a low-level, high-speed swarm racing straight toward the Iranian coastline. High above this skimming wave, the F-A-18 Super Hornets executed their own fire orders. Heavy mechanical thuds echoed through the airframes as dozens of massive GBU-31 precision bunker-busting munitions were released from the wing pylons. The heavy steel bombs dropped into the night, deploying their steering fins as they began a steep, silent plunge toward the buried command centers. As the massive American salvo crossed the coastline, the Iranian defense grid reacted with overwhelming force. Inside the sweltering mountain bunkers, air defense commanders screamed the intercept orders. The dark, jagged ridgelines overlooking Bandar Abbas violently erupted in blinding white light. Heavy surface-to-air missile batteries, previously hidden under camouflage netting and rock overhangs, ripple-fired their entire ready magazines. Massive interceptor missiles leaped from their launch canisters, riding thick pillars of rocket exhaust that turned the coastal night into brilliant, chaotic daylight. The Iranian interceptors climbed at Mach 3, hunting the high-altitude strike fighters, while short-range point defense systems rotated violently toward the low-flying cruise missiles. Radar-guided anti-aircraft cannons spun to life, vomiting thousands of glowing red tracer rounds into the narrow mountain passes. The airspace over the strait was instantly transformed into a lethal, three-dimensional grid of intersecting crossfire. High above the coastline, the first interceptions occurred. Heavy air defense rockets slammed into the incoming American ordnance, detonating with massive, expanding spheres of orange fire. The shockwaves rolled across the mountains as shattered Tomahawk missiles were torn apart in mid-air, their burning debris spiraling down to crash violently into the rocky valleys below. Point defense cannons successfully shredded several low-flying cruise missiles, sending them cartwheeling into the dirt roads in massive secondary fireballs. But the American strike package had been designed for sheer saturation. There were simply too many targets, coming from too many altitudes, moving at too high a speed. While the Iranian defenders focused their radar arrays and cannon fire on the low-skimming Tomahawks and the high-altitude intercept tracks, the silent, heavy, unpowered GBU-31 bunker busters were already falling straight down through the chaotic crossfire. The sky was completely filled with blinding explosions and burning shrapnel, masking the devastating kinetic weight that was now only seconds away from smashing directly into the mountains. Hidden beneath the blinding chaos of the air defense crossfire, the heavy American ordnance arrived with devastating precision. The 2,000-pound GBU-31 bunker-busting munitions dropped vertically at supersonic speeds, guided perfectly by their satellite coordinates. They did not detonate upon contact with the camouflaged mountaintops. Instead, the hardened steel penetrator casings smashed straight through the surface rock, driving dozens of feet deep into the solid earth and reinforced concrete ceilings of the Iranian command bunkers. For a fraction of a second, the mountain ridges appeared completely intact. Then, the delayed action fuses triggered. Deep beneath the earth, tens of thousands of pounds of high explosives detonated simultaneously. The immense kinetic energy was temporarily trapped underground, forcing the catastrophic blast waves to violently seek the paths of least resistance. Entire sections of the coastal hillsides suddenly buckled outward. Massive steel blast doors, engineered to withstand heavy bombardment, were blown completely off their thick hinges, launching across the rocky ravines like heavy shrapnel. Plumes of thick black smoke, pulverized concrete, and shattered steel vomited violently from the subterranean tunnel entrances, choking the mountain roads in a dense, suffocating cloud of gray dust. Inside the subterranean operations centers, the destruction was absolute. The immense shockwaves crushed heavy radar consoles, snapped reinforced concrete support columns in half, and instantly destroyed the centralized communications hubs. Emergency backup generators were shattered by the sheer seismic force, plunging the deep tunnels into complete darkness, lit only by the orange glow of electrical fires and burning insulation. In less than 15 seconds, 10 separate, heavily fortified command bunkers spanning the Bandar Abbas coastal approaches were systematically erased from the battlefield. The violent physical impacts radiated straight up through the rock. Above ground, heavy communication antennas and localized radar dishes were sheared completely off their mounts by the violent tremors. The earth shook violently, triggering sudden landslides of loose rock and dirt that crashed down onto the winding coastal highways. The mountain air filled with the deafening roar of collapsing concrete and the high-pitched hiss of severed hydraulic lines. The immediate physical devastation was overwhelming, but the true crippling blow to the Iranian defense network was entirely electronic. Out on the rocky ridges and dirt roads, inside the sweltering cabs of the 22 dispersed mobile missile launchers, the nature of the battle instantly changed. The heavily encrypted data links connecting the mobile batteries to the centralized command structure abruptly flatlined. Gunners stared in absolute shock as their main targeting screens went completely dark. The steady stream of precise tracking telemetry from the long-range active arrays simply vanished. The unified, highly coordinated coastal defense grid had been entirely shattered in a single, devastating kinetic stroke. The regional commanders who had orchestrated the defense just moments before were completely cut off. The mobile launch crews were instantly left blind, sitting in the open mountains with elevated, fully loaded anti-ship missile canisters, but with no central guidance. Heavy smoke rolled down the hillsides, severely limiting their localized visibility. The deafening sound of secondary explosions echoed through the valleys as the remaining fuel lines inside the destroyed bunkers ignited. But the surviving mobile missile operators were highly trained, and they knew their heavy trucks were entirely exposed to the American stealth fighters circling in the dark sky above. With their command network destroyed, the surviving battery captains realized they had only seconds to act before the next wave of precision munitions found their vehicles. They were completely blind to the larger strategic picture, but they still had the last known coordinates of the American carrier strike group locked into their local computers. Knowing they could not survive a second American volley, the local battery commanders reached for the manual launch controls. Reaching for the manual launch controls, the surviving battery captains refused to let their heavy weapons burn on their transport beds. Without the centralized radar network, they were forced to rely on raw, inertial guidance coordinates fed by the very last active data link. Inside the sweltering truck cabs, targeting operators smashed their fists down on the red manual firing buttons, bypassing all automated safety protocols. Outside in the dark, smoke-filled mountain passes, the heavy hydraulic launch canisters violently shuddered. Solid rocket boosters ignited with a deafening roar, sending blinding columns of yellow fire crashing into the rocky earth. Dozens of heavy anti-ship cruise missiles blew through their protective environmental seals, accelerating instantly and lighting up the jagged coastal ridges like artificial daylight. It was an entirely uncoordinated but massive salvo, an act of sheer tactical desperation that threw a wall of lethal, sea-skimming weapons straight into the dark sky. The heavy missiles arched out over the burning coastline, immediately shedding their spent solid rocket boosters as they plunged toward the black waters of the Arabian Sea. Small turbojet engines spooled up with a high-pitched scream. The weapons aggressively flattened their trajectories, dropping to just 10 meters above the wave tops. They were flying completely blind without mid-course telemetry updates, but their internal active radar seekers were programmed to switch on in the final terminal phase and lock onto the largest metallic reflections in the sector. The unguided swarm formed a chaotic, low-altitude wedge, tearing across the water at near supersonic speeds, flying directly toward the United States Navy carrier strike group. Aboard the American warships, the defensive posture instantly escalated from a protective screen into a desperate fight for survival. The blinding launch flashes in the distant mountains had instantly triggered satellite infrared warnings, and the shipboard ANSPY one-phased array radars quickly picked up the sea-skimming tracks breaking rapidly over the horizon. Inside the blue-lit combat direction centers, the tactical screens turned into a frantic, bloody sea of inbound threat vectors. Electronic warfare officers instantly activated heavy shipborne jamming systems, throwing thick, invisible walls of electromagnetic interference across the water in a frantic attempt to blind the incoming missile seekers. But there were simply too many heavy weapons approaching at an incredibly high velocity. The physical defensive response was brutal and instantaneous. The heavy guided missile cruisers guarding the front edge of the formation erupted in continuous, deafening fire. The steel hatches of their Mark 41 vertical launch systems slammed open in rapid succession, vomiting dozens of SM-2 and SM-6 interceptor missiles straight into the night. The black sky above the American fleet was instantly torn apart by intersecting pillars of blinding white rocket exhaust. The interceptors pitched down violently, diving aggressively toward the incoming Iranian swarm. Miles out over the dark water, the first high-speed interceptions occurred. Massive, expanding spheres of orange fire violently illuminated the sea as the American interceptors collided head-on with the enemy weapons, shattering them into thousands of pieces of burning shrapnel that rained heavily down into the waves. But the uncoordinated, staggered nature of the Iranian launch made the massive swarm highly unpredictable. Several low-skimming missiles slipped entirely through the outer and middle defense layers, their internal seekers successfully locking onto the towering steel superstructures of the escort ships. As the surviving weapons broke through the outer screen, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier executed emergency evasive maneuvers. The 100,000-ton warship leaned hard to starboard, its 4 massive bronze propellers churning the black water into a violent white wake. On the angled flight deck, aviation crews dropped to their knees, desperately gripping heavy steel tie-down chains as the deck violently tilted under their boots. The battle collapsed into the terrifying inner defense perimeter. Aboard the American destroyers flanking the carrier, the automated close-in weapon systems spun to life with a deafening mechanical roar. 6-barrel rotary cannons vomited thick, continuous walls of depleted uranium tracer rounds directly over the dark water. A heavy Iranian cruise missile was shredded just 300 meters from a destroyer's bow, its heavy warhead detonating with a catastrophic shockwave that threw a massive column of white water completely over the forward deck, soaking the ship in salt and burning fuel. The carrier group had survived the desperate counterpunch, but the mobile mountain batteries that fired them were still out there in the smoke. The carrier group had survived the desperate counterpunch, but the mobile mountain batteries that fired them were still out there in the smoke. High on the coastal ridges overlooking Bandar Abbas, the surviving Iranian launch crews scrambled to break down their heavy equipment. Having exposed their exact firing positions by launching the unguided swarm, the massive 10-wheeled transport trucks were completely vulnerable in the open mountain passes. Drivers shoved their transmissions into reverse, grinding gears violently as they tried to back the heavy hydraulic launch canisters away from the exposed cliff edges and into the protective cover of deep rocky ravines. Support crews sprinted through the choking dust, desperately trying to pull camouflage netting back over the hot metal frames. Short-range air defense operators, realizing the extreme danger of their exposed positions, frantically swung their rapid-fire cannons toward the sky, searching blindly for the aircraft they knew were coming. But the American strike wave was already orbiting right above them. The destruction of the subterranean command bunkers had permanently blinded the Iranian coastal air defense network, giving the United States Navy complete control of the upper altitudes. The heavy F-A-18 Super Hornets and advanced F-35C stealth fighters no longer had to fly defensive patterns to avoid long-range surface-to-air missiles. Instead, the tactical air wing transitioned immediately into a systematic hunting formation. High-resolution infrared targeting pods pierced straight through the thick black smoke rolling up from the shattered concrete bunkers below. On the digital cockpit displays of the American strike fighters, the mountain roads were entirely illuminated by the intense thermal signatures of the Iranian diesel transport engines and the glowing heat of their freshly fired launch canisters. The second wave of the American assault began without warning. The stealth fighters pitched down from the dark sky, accelerating aggressively toward the mountain highways. They did not drop heavy bunker-busting bombs this time. Instead, the strike fighters released dozens of heavy CBU-105 precision-guided cluster munitions, specifically designed to annihilate dispersed, unarmored vehicle convoys over a wide area. The heavy olive-drab canisters fell silently through the night air, breaking apart at 2,000 feet above the rocky terrain. Hundreds of individual smart bomblets dispersed across the sky, deploying small stabilization parachutes as they drifted down toward the winding dirt roads. The surviving Iranian point defense cannons opened up in a desperate, continuous roar. Thousands of red tracer rounds cut blindly upward into the darkness, attempting to shred the falling canisters before they could deploy. Several cluster bombs were destroyed in mid-air, detonating harmlessly above the ridges. But there were far too many munitions falling simultaneously. As the surviving submunitions descended, their internal infrared seekers activated, instantly locking onto the massive heat blooms of the scrambling Iranian missile trucks. The results were immediate and devastating. The dark sky above the mountain passes flashed with hundreds of simultaneous white detonations. Copper penetrator jets, driven by high explosives, shot straight down into the engine blocks and fuel tanks of the heavy transport vehicles. The coastal highway violently erupted as the precision shrapnel shredded the unarmored truck cabs and tore through the remaining solid rocket fuel trapped inside the unspent missile canisters. Secondary explosions ripped through the narrow ravines, throwing burning tires, twisted hydraulic arms, and shattered launch tubes hundreds of feet into the air. Entire sections of the mountain roads were engulfed in continuous, rolling walls of orange fire. Drivers who had tried to escape down the winding switchbacks were caught instantly in the cascading blasts, their heavy trucks losing control and tumbling violently off the sheer cliff edges into the dark valleys below. The American strike fighters circled relentlessly in the smoke-choked sky, identifying every remaining thermal signature and dropping follow-on munitions until the entire coastal approach was transformed into a continuous line of burning steel. The organized coastal defense force was being physically erased, leaving absolutely nowhere for the surviving crews to hide. The continuous line of burning steel along the coastal highway signaled the complete physical and organizational collapse of the Iranian coastal defense formation. 22 heavy mobile missile batteries, the absolute core of the anti-ship perimeter guarding the Strait of Hormuz, were now entirely trapped in a high-altitude kill zone. With their subterranean command centers completely erased by bunker-busting munitions and their electronic data links fully severed, there was no centralized retreat order. Individual transport drivers made desperate, uncoordinated attempts to save their surviving equipment. Massive 10-wheeled missile carriers ground their heavy gears, violently throwing up curtains of dirt and gravel as they tried to force their way through the narrow mountain choke points. But the American strike fighters held absolute control of the dark sky above, and the burning wreckage from the initial cluster strikes had already blocked the primary escape routes. A column of 5 heavy transport trucks, carrying fully loaded anti-ship canisters, attempted to bypass a burning roadblock by driving directly along the exposed edge of a sheer cliff face. High above, the infrared targeting sensors of an orbiting F-A-18 Super Hornet instantly locked onto their massive thermal signatures. The pilot rolled his aircraft inverted, pulled straight down into a steep dive, and released 2 heavy laser-guided munitions. The steel bombs fell silently through the thick black smoke and slammed perfectly into the center of the frantic convoy. The resulting detonation was catastrophic. The intense kinetic blast tore the unarmored truck cabs completely to pieces, instantly shredding the diesel engines and throwing the heavy chassis sideways. But the true devastation came a split second later, when the immense heat of the explosions penetrated the thick steel skins of the unspent missile canisters. Tens of thousands of pounds of highly volatile solid rocket fuel instantly cooked off. A massive, blinding white fireball expanded violently across the cliff face, generating a shockwave so powerful it sheared the rock wall completely away. The shattered, burning skeletons of the heavy transport trucks were blown entirely off the mountain highway, tumbling violently down into the dark ravines in a trail of flaming diesel and twisted metal. Across the entire Bandar Abbas operational sector, this brutal scene repeated itself. The vaunted mobile defense network did not just retreat, it disintegrated. Short-range point defense cannons, having completely exhausted their ammunition tracking the overwhelming swarm of precision munitions, simply stopped firing. Their radar dishes drooped silently, completely powerless to stop the incoming strikes. The remaining air defense vehicles were systematically picked apart by F-35C stealth fighters dropping small-diameter bombs directly through their thin roof armor. Without their protective umbrella, the last remaining mobile launchers were hunted down and destroyed before they could even attempt to power down their systems. Thick, oily black smoke rolled heavily down the mountains and drifted out over the dark waters of the Arabian Sea. The mountain passes were littered with the incinerated remains of over 24 heavy military vehicles. Hydraulic launch arms were bent backward like broken bones, and the intense heat of the burning solid rocket fuel melted the heavy rubber truck tires completely into the asphalt. Secondary explosions continued to echo through the jagged valleys every few minutes, as isolated ammunition caches and pressurized fuel lines finally failed under the extreme ambient heat. In less than 20 minutes of intense combat, the United States Navy Air Wing had completely dismantled a heavily fortified missile wall that had taken decades to build. The enemy's ability to threaten the strategic maritime corridor from the shoreline had been violently and entirely erased. With the mobile defense network violently erased and the coastal highway turned into a continuous line of burning wreckage, the immediate kinetic battle began to slow. But the dark waters and shattered mountains remained incredibly dangerous. The continuous roar of exploding cluster munitions was replaced by the low, steady rumble of secondary fires, and the high-pitched whine of American jet engines circling unchallenged in the upper atmosphere. The United States Navy had physically dismantled the primary threat, and the massive tactical machine instantly shifted from an aggressive strike posture to absolute battlefield control. High above the choking black smoke, advanced E-2D, advanced Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft pushed deeper into the airspace. Their rotating radar domes swept the jagged terrain over and over again, searching frantically for any surviving mobile launchers that might have escaped the slaughter. Down on the surface of the Arabian Sea, the situation aboard the carrier strike group was tense and methodical. The fleet had survived the desperate, uncoordinated anti-ship swarm, but the sheer proximity of the interceptions had left physical scars on the defensive screen. Aboard the forward-guided missile destroyer that had shredded an incoming weapon at dangerously close range, damage control teams sprinted across the wet, salt-stained decks. The massive column of water thrown up by the intercepted warhead had soaked the forward hull in highly corrosive, unspent rocket fuel and heavy ocean debris. Sailors wearing heavy fire-retardant gear and chemical masks dragged thick, high-pressure hoses across the steel plates, violently washing the toxic chemical residue over the side to prevent secondary deck fires. As the warships stabilized their formations, the heavy thud of helicopter rotors began to echo across the black water. Squadron after squadron of MH-60S Seahawk search and rescue helicopters lifted off from the flight decks of the carrier and her escorts. They banked low over the dark waves, shining intense white searchlights down into the swirling smoke. They were not just looking for floating missile debris or unexploded ordnance, they were establishing a tight, physical perimeter around the strike group, hunting for any hostile fast attack boats or silent diesel-electric submarines that might attempt to exploit the chaos. The helicopters swept back and forth through the falling embers, drifting over the strait, their downdrafts violently churning the thick oil slicks that had leaked from the shattered Iranian missiles. 80 miles away, high in the jagged passes overlooking Bandar Abbas, there were no rescue helicopters coming. The surviving Iranian crews were completely cut off from the outside world. Without functioning command bunkers or encrypted radio links, the scattered survivors of the mobile missile units were forced to navigate a burning graveyard entirely on their own. Men emerged slowly from the deep, rocky ravines, their uniforms covered in thick gray concrete dust and their faces blackened by diesel soot. They stumbled blindly past the twisted, molten frames of their heavy transport trucks, dragging their wounded comrades away from the intense heat of the lingering chemical fires. The massive concrete bunkers buried deep inside the mountain ridges were completely silent, entirely sealed off by thousands of tons of collapsed earth and shattered blast doors. There was no centralized rescue effort because the regional commanders who would have ordered it were permanently buried under the rubble. Local medics worked desperately in the dark, using the orange glow of burning solid rocket fuel to see as they wrapped bandages around severe shrapnel wounds. The entire coastal ridgeline, once the most heavily fortified maritime choke point in the world, had been reduced to an isolated, smoking ruin. The United States Navy controlled the sky, they controlled the water, and they had violently cleared the blocked shipping lanes, but the absolute devastation they had just inflicted on the shoreline was about to send a massive shockwave far beyond the burning mountains. As the rescue helicopters pulled back into a tight defensive perimeter, the massive United States Navy Carrier Strike Group finally began its transit through the newly opened maritime corridor. The 100,000-ton nuclear-powered aircraft carrier moved at a slow, deliberate pace, its gray steel hull cutting through water heavily stained with leaked diesel and chemical foam. On the starboard side, the jagged coastal mountains of Bandar Abbas glowed with the deep orange fires of 22 incinerated mobile missile units and 10 shattered subterranean command bunkers. The American fleet had survived the desperate, unguided counterattack, violently dismantling a coastal defense network that had taken decades to construct. But there was no cheering on the flight deck. The exhausted aviation crews worked silently in the suffocating morning heat, dragging heavy steel chains across the deck to secure the returning F-35C stealth fighters and F-A-18 Super Hornets. They wiped toxic soot from their visors, looking back at the burning shoreline and knowing exactly what their massive kinetic strikes had just triggered. The physical sea lane was technically clear of anti-ship missile threats, but the strategic shockwave generated by the battle was already tearing through the world. Within minutes of the first bunker-busting detonation, international maritime insurance agencies completely suspended all coverage for commercial vessels operating anywhere near the region. The burning wreckage sliding off the coastal highways sent an immediate, catastrophic panic through the global commodity exchanges. Crude oil prices violently spiked to historic levels as automated trading systems reacted to the massive explosions. Commercial supertankers that had been loitering just outside the engagement zone immediately reversed their massive engines, turning their heavy hulls away from the dark water. No civilian captain was willing to sail through a narrow corridor where advanced stealth fighters and heavy cluster munitions had just turned the mountains into a continuous, smoking kill zone. The United States had brutally forced the door open with overwhelming precision firepower, but international shipping instantly paralyzed itself in sheer terror. Thousands of miles away, Allied and rival command headquarters scrambled to process the terrifying scale of the devastation. The absolute erasure of the Iranian early warning and mobile missile network was a staggering display of deep penetration capability, but it carried an irreversible geopolitical consequence. This was not a localized skirmish, a limited maritime interception, or a proportional warning strike. This was the systematic, total destruction of a sovereign nation's primary southern defense shield, executed in less than 30 minutes. International defense ministers stared in dead silence at live satellite thermal feeds, watching the continuous, rolling fires consuming the strategic choke point. The deployment of heavy bunker-busting munitions against deep subterranean command targets signaled a massive, unstoppable escalation. Neighboring regional powers immediately pushed their own ballistic missile forces to maximum alert, dragging heavy strategic weapons out of underground tunnels in anticipation of a devastating, theater-wide retaliation. Back in the dark, choking passes overlooking the strait, the surviving Iranian artillerymen and shattered medical teams continued to dig blindly through the pulverized concrete and twisted rebar. They had lost their heavy anti-ship batteries, their advanced active radar arrays, and their localized command structure. But the vast, deeply buried military apparatus further inland remained completely intact. Deep underground in the central plateau, Supreme Commanders were already viewing the grim damage assessments, shifting their remaining heavy assets out of the coastal kill zones and preparing the nation for total mobilization. Out on the black water, the massive American aircraft carrier slowly disappeared into the heavy summer haze, its defensive radars still spinning rapidly as it pushed deeper into the hostile Gulf. The smoking, silent graveyard of Bandar Abbas had successfully secured the immediate passage, but as the fires continued to burn heavily into the pale morning sky, the grim reality settled over the fleet. This brutal, overwhelming demonstration of carrier firepower was not the final victory. It was only the violent opening act of a much wider, far more dangerous war.